Good morning, everybody. Good to see you this morning. It's so good. And again, visitors, we're happy that you have come our way. If you live here in the Chattanooga area, I'd like to ask you to make Central your home. Those that are distant-wise, come back anytime. Central members, great day today. So glad you're here. Matthew chapter 5. We continue our study in the Beatitudes. We wrap up really the last Beatitude this morning with verse 10. An amazing verse that follows up with a couple comments from Jesus in verses 11 and 12. But we're going to read verse 10 and listen to the challenge that Jesus gives us. All of these begin with the concept of blessed. You're blessed for this, you're blessed for that. So we come down to verse 10 and we get another paradox here. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Persecution. No one wants persecution. I don't want to be persecuted. I was with a fellow some years ago. We were studying about Christianity, and we came upon this idea, kind of reading from James chapter 1, which was read earlier, that we are blessed when we're persecuted. So this guy prays, Lord, just send more suffering my way. And I ducked. I had my head down already, but I ducked. And I was like, he said that, not me. We don't want to be persecuted, seriously. And yet, when you look at all of these Beatitudes, every one of these things are things that are counterculture. They go against our nature. Who wants to be poor in spirit? Who wants to be mourning over their sin? A lot of times sin is something we enjoy doing. Who wants to hunger and thirst for righteousness? I'd like to be on my own and just do my own thing. And you see, that's counterculture. It goes against our human nature because we want to choose our own ways and our own things, and we want to have a nice life out of it. And so we'll dodge the persecutions. And yet, number one, it's an undeniable decree from Jesus that his followers will suffer persecution. Listen to a couple things that he said. Mark chapter 13, verse 9, he says, they will deliver you up before councils, and you will be beaten in the synagogues. Talking to his disciples particularly. Or you might look in Luke chapter 21, if you'd like to turn to that with me. In verses 16 and 17. This one hits home a lot more. Some of you may have experienced this. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. And you will be hated by all men for my name's sake. I do know people that have personally been thrown out of their homes because they chose to become a Christian and went against that of their family. It is promised by Jesus that'll happen. In John chapter 15, gives a little explanation of why. John 15, verses 18 and 19 particularly we'll look at here. If the world hates you, you should know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. When you choose true Christianity, and you live and behave and dress and act like that, even the kindness that you have is hated because the world lives differently and they don't like seeing that. Why persecution? John chapter 3, verses 19 and 20. Men loved darkness rather than light, for their works were evil. Another place in the book of John, Jesus says, for everyone that does evil will hate light. So you understand that. You choose Christianity, that is going to happen. Peter talks about it in chapter 4, verse 4 of a letter that he writes. And Peter knows about persecution. He tried dodging a bit of it when he denied the Lord toward the end of Jesus' ministry as he was being called in account before councils and eventually crucified. So Peter says they think it's strange that you don't run with them. And they look at your lifestyle and think, You're weird. Look at all the joy I'm having and the things I'm doing. But because you don't choose that, yes, Jesus says they're going to hate you. Doesn't make sense in one way, even out of the kindness. The application, as we think about it, because we live in a culture where some of our laws and some of our people are definitely pushing against Christianity. They would do a whole lot more, matter of fact, if our laws would allow that. And some of our own laws protect them and not us. So what do? Number one, act right. Doesn't make sense. Out of our feelings, when we get attacked for doing good, for living right, it riles us. It arouses us in a way that we want to respond with anger and hate. And boy, go back to Matthew chapter 5. And what Jesus says is so strange. Verse 10 again. Blessed are you, are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of God. And now look at verses 11 and 12. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my name's sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Wow. You see what Jesus is saying here? My choice of living Christianity not only brings me blessings, but I'm supposed to act a certain way when I get persecuted. And it's not to be riled or aggravated, but rather I ought to rejoice. Doesn't go very well. Hard to do. Matter of fact, Isaiah chapter 53, verse 7, just lays down the pattern of example through the life of Jesus. Now, Isaiah is talking 400 or 500 years before Jesus' life. This is a prophecy about Jesus. And when you turn to it, Isaiah gets real specific about one thing that's going to happen. He's going to suffer. And so it talks about the verse 3 that he was despised and rejected by men. Titles him a man of sorrows. What a name for Jesus. Verse 6, because we are sheep have gone astray and turned the wrong way. And then verse 7, look at this. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as the sheep before its shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Jesus, while he was being crucified, had every opportunity and every cause and every reason to look around at all those people, knowing their sins, and call them out one by one. You hypocrite, you're doing this and you're nailing me for what reason? And yet he lays there, puts his hands out, and allows those people to nail him to the cross. While probably the other two thieves are in the process are also being nailed, are cursing and spitting and doing anything they can to fight him. Here's Jesus saying, here's the left, here's the right. Didn't say a thing. No reviling. Rejoice when you're persecuted. Philippians chapter 1, verse 29. Paul says, we are granted the right to suffer like Jesus. Think about it. It's a privilege. Here's what's happening in all of this. As it's telling it, it says, I'm getting the privilege and the opportunity to stand alongside the prophets of God. Yeah, I'm being persecuted. I'm going to stand alongside of them shoulder to shoulder. And to my left is Jesus himself. I'm lined up with people of character, with people of God. So as we're looking at persecution, we rejoice. And then we realize in the process, we get to stand with the best of God's people. Think about it. Because it puts you in the company of the greats. For the same way they persecuted the prophets. James says in James chapter 5, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. So when I suffer as a Christian, I get the privilege of standing alongside of Jesus and alongside the apostles who gave their lives, and the prophets the same. So we are acting right. We are thinking right because we are standing alongside the prophets. And then we need to judge right too. As we look at that, a lot of times when we're being persecuted, we want to back away. We want to shrink down. We want to avoid that because it just makes sense to do that. And yet we ought to realize that real Christianity costs. Jesus says in Luke 9, verse 23, if any man, talking to his apostles, but he knows this is going to be written, so he's describing it to you and me. If any man wants to come after me, he must first take up his cross and follow me daily. So this whole process, you see, is a judgment call by us. To realize that this is what costs. It is what has value. Jesus talks about, he that is ashamed of me, of him I will be ashamed of before my Father in heaven. Think about it for just a moment here. As you're looking at Christianity and the persecution that does come upon us, the reaction of people when they see us being Christians or hear of that, and it works on our minds and our hearts. And yet, if we act right, if we think right and look at what's going on, we stand alongside of these prophets and Jesus, and we judge right, what we're doing is understanding that I'm paying the cost to be a Christian. It's a privilege to pay for that. Following Jesus, walking with him. It's different than the rest of the world. And if they choose any one of our friends, it becomes their right and their privilege. There's no membership fees. The doors are open wide. And yet not many are willing to follow. Because it costs. And Jesus knows that. Blessed are those who know its worth. I saw a video clip back a few days ago. I was not too often am I on Facebook, but you get so many of these postings, those that don't get on there, the ones who don't understand, but they pass everything around what's going on in life, and what they see, they pass on to somebody else. And there was a video clip on there of 5 kids playing on the playground, ages 5 to 10 or 11. And they were just having a ball. The swing was going on, the teeter-totter, and they were just running back and forth. And they're going, and by the way, this is on a Marine base playground. And then all of a sudden, the Marine anthem sounds out. The kids are quickly jumping off the swing, and every one of them standing and looking toward where the music is. Just children. No parents telling them they have to do any of this. They stop and they stand there until the music quits. And then they quickly go back to their swings and do all these things. But I will tell you what. Those kids understand suffering. Probably many of them have either their moms or their dads have been deployed or are deployed, and that's why they're on the Marine base. They understood the cost for them personally, because they have to give up all of that in order to be there. And yet they stood bravely alongside of whoever were parents were involved in this with the privilege and the right to be in that act, to be involved in what's going on. There was a video, or a clip rather, back a few years ago that I saw. It was a Veterans Day parade or whatever, and the flag is marching down the street, and it's led by a bunch of military and people playing and highly waving, and a lot of kids and all these are sitting around the ground and they're doing whatever, and one older man pushing himself up on a wheelchair, on the back of it, veteran symbols, and he's saluting the flag. Because everybody was excited about the flag going by. But the man that paid the cost was still saluting it because he understood its value. When we are persecuted by Christians, we should rejoice. It allows us to act properly, to love our enemies in spite of that, as Jesus did. To think rightly about what's going on. and to judge that we get this privilege to stand here because it costs, but it's so much worth it. As someone said some time ago just about life and what they were going on, I so quickly apply it to Christianity. If it costs you 10 cents, your Christianity, then when you walk out the door, basically it's only worth a dime to you. It might cost, but it's worth it. And I'm so glad to be involved. I rejoice at the opportunity. I don't duck as much as I'd like to, because I know it's right to rejoice, to think right, because I stand alongside the right people. And to judge that the worth of it is worth every bit. So as you're struggling and as you're dealing with these things in life, know that it gives you a value. You ought to rejoice, and you ought to love, and you ought to act kindly. It will happen, it will continue, and it'll get worse. But as people of God, if you live it right, you're blessed in this life. It takes care of you and gives you worth and gives you a home in heaven. Now as you look at your life, I want you to ask. I want to ask you, are you paying the cost? Or are you just floating along? As someone said some time ago, even dead fish can float downstream. Are you living? And are you trusting? And are you a Christian? Well, ask that for those that may not have made that decision. To be baptized into Christ and to have the opportunity to stand and have your sins washed away. What an amazing thing. But it costs to do that, to make that decision. But it's so worth it. We sing a song to encourage you to become a Christian this morning. Or to get your life right if you've gone away, you've made the decision, but you've gone back on God. But think about it and choose Jesus again. Or for the first time. Come down front, please, while we stand.